So the G7 summit, well, is happening this weekend, or by the time this video comes out, it'll all have been gone. But I think this sums up very clearly one of the key points in this article, what this tension is all about in these trade talks. So, obviously, as you know, we've got the whole tariff things in America. All these countries are not happy, and the G7 summit is probably the first time where these things are going to get discussed. Will it end? No. Will there be retaliatory actions? Of course there will be. And a lot of people are just generally pissed off by the fact that he's been doing this. And this is one of the big things, and how much a departure Trump is doing this from. So, for much of the period since the late 1940s, the US has been one of the most important driving forces behind multilateral efforts to lower barriers to international commerce. Remember, Brexiteers constantly tell us how good this is, that we want no barriers at all, and all this stuff, but, you know, we'll continue. First through the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trades, and then through the World Trade Organization. I remember, the Brexiteers sing the praises of the World Trade Organization as if it's meant to be this really good thing, and it is a good thing, because this basically helps countries mitigate trade disputes. Now, this is where it starts to get serious, because the US, as I just explained, is one of the key driving forces behind the World Trade Organization. So, for 3/4 of a century after this process began, the US has one of the lowest levels of tariffs of any WTO member. Although some US officials claim that Hong Kong has no tariffs at all. The US approach has generally been in line with the view of the great majority of economists that all countries gain from trade liberalisation. In fact, most take the view that countries benefit from lowering their trade barriers as that reduces prices for consumers and businesses that use imported goods. But some people do lose from trade liberalisation, for instance, in industries that have become more exposed to competition, such as textiles and furniture producers in developed economies. Although technology has been an important factor in affecting employment in those industries. This means it's politically easier to sell trade liberalisation, as there are new opportunities for exporters to compensate. The view in the White House, however, has changed. President Trump appears to regard trade as an area where countries either win or lose. And that is an incredibly dumb way to view trade. I cannot express how dumb that is. You want to trade, and you should not view it as a win or losing trade relationship. You should not view it as something like that. So he measures this by whether exports are greater than imports. Because the US has a trade deficit, it imports more than it exports. He sees this as losing, and that he believes it as a result of bad deals done by the previous administrations. He also parts from his predecessors in having no enthusiasm for multilateral negotiations, which all countries are now moving forward in favour of. I've said this before, but the future of the world in general is being in these economic blocs like the EU. So, and he preferring bilateral one-to-one deals. He has shown a much greater readiness to use trade barriers to force concessions from trade partners, exemplified by his tweet about trade wars being easy to win. Quote, "When we are down 100 billion with a certain country and they get cute, don't trade anymore. We win big, it's easy." Steel and aluminium tariffs cast a dark shadow ahead as the G7 meet. President Trump justifies the measure in terms of national security and needed to reduce the dependence of the US military on imports of metals. The EU in particular does not believe that, and responds that it reflects the view that the US measures are protectionist. The EU Trade Commissioner told the European Parliament, "We suspect that the US move is effectively not based on national security considerations, but an economic safeguard measure in disguise. It's not the first time that major economies leaders have played a bit fast and loose with the global trade rules. But many observers see Trump as taking this to a new level. Under him, the US has shown reluctance to sign up to the routine pledges to avoid trade protectionism that are usually made at summits. As finance ministers meeting last year of the wider G20 group, the pledge was absent from the committee. Later that year, the G7 with President Trump did reaffirm his readiness to fight protectionism, but the fact there wasn't any question about whether or not that would happen is a mark of how different he is being seen. Meanwhile, the World Trade Organization system for ruling on trade disputes is in danger of grinding to a halt. The body which hears appeals against internal rulings could become unable to function. It normally has seven members agreed by the World Trade Organization countries, but the US has resisted new appointments, and it only currently has 4. The number is due to drop to 3 in September when another member's term ends. 3 are needed to hear an appeal, so this will become an even harder for the board to deal with its workload. The reason for this issue is that US has refused to support new appointments. A group of law professors has warned that this could lead to the crumbling of the World Trade Organization dispute settlement system. The mood music at the summit will not be relaxing. The other 6 see the global trade system that has evolved since World War II, a system based on the World Trade Organization and a patchwork of free trade agreements that go beyond the World Trade Organization rules, as something worth preserving. In President Trump, they are dealing with a leader seen by many observers as a serious threat to the future of that system. Look, trade is complex. It is not something you can very easily fathom or discuss and break down, because very often you can increase something in trade and something drastic might happen somewhere else. Something else will suffer because of it. There are huge knock-on effects. This is why people go in and specialise directly in these types of things. Now, I am not claiming to be any kind of expert. I am not even claiming to be a novice in this. You know, when you look at all these different trade and all these different, experts on trade and who discuss all these things, it's not something, someone like me can easily, fathom. But I've tried, and I have basically picked up on this. Everyone fully agrees and understands that the World Trade Organization is very good for solving disputes. Now, if you look back at history, there is a very good and clear case for a very good argument that most wars throughout history have started because of trade disputes. So having an organization that can function, that can solve trade disputes in a good and, peaceful manner, of course this is a good thing. And yet here you have Trump saying, "Oh no, it'll be fine, we're just going to tear that organisation a new one." Something that the US helped to build is quite flabbergasting. And now you get the UK situation in this, of what happens if we go to a no deal scenario, which is something could potentially happen to this country. We then have to rely on the World Trade Organization rules. So let's say America does something to this country. Remember this, Brexiteers, this is a very likely scenario. What do we do if Trump does something that affects our trade or affects our industries? What mechanism do we then use to to solve this dispute. Normally we just go straight to the World Trade Organization, but as you can see, Trump and his administration are deadlocking the appointment of new judges to help solve this. Currently, as it says, there are 4, and one's due to end his term soon. So that leaves them basically with 3, and you need at least 3 to hear complaints and disputes. The system will effectively grind to a halt. This is why you need to be part of the EU, part of the single market, because then we won't be by ourselves trying to organise. We will literally be a mouse nipping at the heel of an elephant. Trump won't care what happens to people's jobs in the UK. He's expressed that very clearly with the aluminium and steel tariffs. This will affect British jobs. Being in the EU, being a member of the Single Market and Customs Union gives us greater power in trade negotiations, because 27 countries, negotiating a multilateral trade agreement is far better than a single one-on-one. And here's the thing: to evolve this system, you need laws, you need regulations in place to make this effective market work. This is why the European Union has been so successful. The European Court of Justice, which solves disputes between members, is based on a lot of the on having a single judiciary that can help solve these type of disputes. And as I've said this before, we are going to have to follow someone's rules. And you've just had Boris Johnson, of all people, got recorded secretly a meeting basically making the case to stop Brexit. Basically complaining about the fact that we won't have any more power in the EU. Yes, because we've left the EU, Boris. You campaigned on that very thing. But that's another video for another time, because I'll just go off on one. But yeah, G7 could be very interesting. So I might do another video, but like I say, by the time this video comes out, it could be all over. It'll be all over by then. But yeah. America, this is why you elect politicians. You might not like politicians, but you wouldn't hire a mechanic to be your doctor. And you wouldn't hire a doctor to be a mechanic. One has a lot more information and training than the other does on the human body or a car. But there you go.